of the goddess herself, and cut into dazzling gems and reliquaries by artisans of neighboring lands. But for the Moria, gifted with the powers of the Lady of Shadows, it was always so much more than a stone. Its prisms transformed the surrounding world into living memory. Rodriguez's information was worth dying for. Celeste had to believe that. She prayed to Our Lady of Whispers that this was the day help would arrive. It had been 8 days exactly since she'd sent the messenger to the Whispers, and 9 days since Rodriguez arrived at her doorstep, half dead, with news so terrifying that even her hardened heart had stirred. Rodriguez had survived nearly a month under the torture of the arm of justice, and then the journey from the capital. That alone could make anyone mad, make anyone see things. But if it were true, there was no worse fate for the kingdom. The world would be forced to bow to Puerto Leones. She kicked her horse harder, held the reins as tightly as the breath in her chest. Finally, the horse's hooves hit the main dirt road of Esmeraldas. The village still slumbered, but she bypassed the square, avoiding the cobblestones that would wake her neighbors. Despite the dark, she couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Celeste dismounted and locked the horse back in the small stable. She just needed to make it to the door, and then she'd be safe in her host's house. She crept through the rows of thorn bushes, hoping Emilia hadn't lost sleep waiting up for her. In her many years as spy master for the Whispers, Celeste had called several places home, but none had been as welcoming as Emilia Siriano and her family's. They knew her as Celeste Porto, a widow, a midwife, a caretaker. Though they were used to her insomnia, she had never brought trouble to their doorstep. Come daylight, she'd have to explain why Rodriguez could not be buried in the cemetery, and why there was no family to claim him. Celeste and the Whispers were all the family he had. Turning her key in the kitchen's side door, Celeste paused, listening. The silence was disturbed by the drying crackle of fire and a rustle of her shawl as she slipped inside. Soft light came from the red embers in the hearth. Her bones ached for sleep, but the Sirianos would rise soon. Nights in Esmeraldas weren't usually so cool this time of year, but she loved any excuse to build a fire, busy her hands with simple tasks. That and the perfect loaf of bread were the gifts she brought to this household. A touch of smoke mingled with the sweet, grass-perfumed breeze that pushed through the window as Celeste warmed her wind-ravaged face by the hearth. Flames swallowed the kindling and caught the edges of the dried logs. In moments like this, it was easy to let herself believe she was only a housemaid with a simple life. But after decades of hiding in plain sight, her senses wouldn't let her rest. She identified 2 scents that hadn't been there when she'd left: anointing oils and unwashed bodies. She remembered she'd shut all the windows and doors before dragging Rodriguez out. Her spine stiffened. Celeste San Marina. A clear, cutting voice spoke as the growing fire illuminated the corners of the dark. A man rose from a chair with deadly grace. I'd hoped our paths would cross again. Celeste's breath caught. Though he only wore a rumpled white tunic and brown riding trousers, she would have recognized his regal face anywhere. The last surviving son of King Fernando. They called him so many things, but they never uttered his name, as if afraid it would somehow conjure his likeness, no matter the time or place. Príncipe Dorado, bloodied prince, the lion's fury, Mata Hermano. As he took a step closer in the faint light, she could almost see the ghost of the child he'd been during her time at the palace, a curious golden-haired boy, a boy who would grow up to be worse than his father. She'd only ever called him Castellan. Before Celeste could run, the prince motioned with his gloved hand, and 2 soldiers bounded in from the hall. One of them closed a meaty hand around her throat. The second blocked the kitchen door. We can make this simple, Castellan said, his voice deep and even as he strode over to them. He tugged off his fine leather